Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei. A court rules 6 former Gloriavale women were employees, not volunteers. They slogged it out with little or no choice, long hours and harsh conditions. So is the cheque in the mail? Their lawyer joins us live. The tax in question facing the Prime Minister. If capital gains and wealth tax is off the table, what is he serving up to voters? FIFA is giving away thousands of World Cup match tickets to kick things along. And listen up, ears are apparently the new fingerprints. And a World War II vet gets an Air Force flyover for his birthday. Happy 100th, Eddie Chapman. You can watch us live on the RNZ website and Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Kamna Māori, I'm Marama Tipole. The Employment Court has found 6 former Gloriavale women working on the Christian community's domestic teams were employees, not volunteers. The women took Gloriavale's leaders to court, arguing they lived in servitude. Jean Edwards reports.
The women said they worked under an all-pervading regime of secular and religious control, preparing food, cooking, cleaning and doing the laundry from the age of about 15. The Employment Court's Chief Judge, Christina Ingalls, has found the women were employees who worked extremely hard under punishing conditions for years on end, in an experience that has left deep scars. She says the women had very little real choice about working, having been primed for the job and taught from birth to submit to male leadership in all aspects of their life.
One of the former Gloriavale women says her family's safety is why she brought the case. Rose Stantrue says she wants a better life for her 10 siblings who still live inside the community.
My main goal for doing this was for my family who is still in there, for my little sisters, so they never have to grow up and face the things that I faced. I want them to be safe, I want them to have choices, I want them to have freedom.
Gloriavale's overseeing shepherd, Howard Temple, says leaders believe the decision is wrong and intend to lodge an appeal. A year-long investigation into physical and sexual abuse of young boys at a care provider in Auckland has seen police arrest 2 men and a woman. The offending dates back to between 2003 and 2010. County's Manukau Police carried out 2 search warrants across South Auckland today and filed 36 charges, mostly for sexual violation, injuring and neglect of a child. The charges related to 9 victims. Charged are 2 men aged 62 and 39 and a woman aged 66. Detective Senior Sergeant Mal Hassel says police have spoken to a large number of former residents of the facility but want to track down more people. A helicopter pilot who was on Whakaari White Island when it erupted says jumping into the water saved him. Brian DePau was one of WorkSafe's witnesses giving testimony in the trial against the island's owners and 2 tourism operators at Auckland District Court today. Mr DePau was one of the guides taking tour groups to the island on the day of the disaster. He told the court getting into the water spared him severe injuries.
The water is what saved us from that steam, from that heat, from that exposure. So that's definitely what saved us that day.
Mr DePau later got on a tour boat and helped tend to victims who were badly burnt. A fierce heat wave is gripping parts of Europe. An anticyclone named Cerberus is causing daytime temperatures to exceed 40 degrees Celsius across much of Italy. A red alert has been issued for 10 cities, including Florence, Rome and Bologna. Organisers of the FIFA World Cup have moved to give ticket sales in Aotearoa a kick by offering 20,000 of them for free online. A week out, only a little more than a third of the nearly 900,000 tickets have sold. In Wellington, one passionate young football fan said they've been underwhelmed by the publicity for the matches.
I feel like women's football is really undervalued compared to like the hype around the FIFA World Cup, because like we're hosting the Women's World Cup and there's like no banners, no posters, like lots of people don't even know it's happening.
5,000 free tickets for the Spain versus Costa Rica match in the capital were swiftly snapped up today. And wildlife officials in California are trying to capture a sea otter that's been attacking surfers and hijacking their boards. Surfers in the Santa Cruz area are being warned to avoid the animal. The female otter is said to have been harassing surfers for weeks, but has recently become more aggressive. It's 5:04. Prop Tamaiti Williams is set to make his All Blacks debut against South Africa. Williams is the only newcomer in the squad to take on the Springboks in Auckland on Saturday night. Hailing from the small northland town of Kaio, Williams says it's an emotional time for his whānau.
I think a lot of young Māori boys could only dream of being in this team. So for me to get an opportunity, it is pretty cool. And called my parents first. Mum just cried. Dad didn't say anything. And then I called my fiancée and she just cried too. So I think it's taken a bit of time for them to let it soak in.
There are 5 changes to the run-on side for Mount Smart, with Mark Talia and Will Jordan both back from injury, while Richie Mo'unga and Brodie Retallick and Cody Taylor also returned to the starting 15. Meanwhile, South Africa captain Etienne Estebeth's father has died after a battle with cancer, leaving him in doubt for the game. Black Ferns lock Maya Roos will become the youngest player to captain the side when New Zealand play the USA in Ottawa on Saturday. The 21-year-old was born in the United States and says the only previous captaincy experience she's had was at school level. Regular co-captains Ruahei Demand and Kennedy Simon have been named on the bench, with coach Alan Bunting looking to increase the wider squad's experience. And New Zealand basketballer Finn Delaney will return to the Breakers on a 2-year contract. The 27-year-old played 162 games for the Australian National Basketball League club before opting to play last season in Germany. That's the news.
Tax is back in the headlines.
Coalitions have to be built, but the Prime Minister's made clear his view around the future of these kinds of taxes or the lack of them.
Causing a bit of a stir among parties.
I find that quite frustrating because if you campaign on the basis of no change and then you get into government, then you've got no mandate for change.
And the public.
It's a very good idea to rule it out because the wealthy people that employed a lot of people would sell everything and just leave the country.
Your daily dose of politics, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
RNZ National, Lisa Owen and Checkpoint is next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. In the west from Northland to Kapiti, including Coromandel and the Central High Country, isolated showers more widespread with coastal thunderstorms possible south of Waikato this evening and showers clearing south of Whanganui for a time overnight. Now for the remainder of the North Island, mostly fine. A few showers this evening and again tomorrow afternoon in Bay of Plenty. Nelson and Marlborough, partly cloudy. For Canterbury, partly cloudy too, with isolated showers for tomorrow morning and afternoon. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain or showers, some possibly heavy. Tuatago and Southland now, scattered showers, becoming isolated tomorrow, then retreating to the south coast in the evening. And for the Chatham Islands, squally showers with possible thunderstorms easing tonight. A few showers for tomorrow, turning to rain for a time in the afternoon. RNZ National, it's 5:07.
Kia ora rā e ho, tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki Checkpoint te tēnei rā. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. We now have a voice, relief and vindication for women who, according to their lawyer, were treated like slaves. The Employment Court has ruled 6 former Gloriavale women were employees who worked extremely hard under punishing conditions for years on end. The Chief Judge found the women were taught from birth that they were to submit to male leadership in all aspects of their life and primed to work on the Christian community's domestic teams. Their experience at the Christian community has left deep scars. Jean Edwards and cameraman Nathan McKinnon have the story.
Serenity Pilgrim testified to working an average of 90 hours a week during her teenage years on Gloriavale's teams, preparing food, cooking, cleaning and doing the laundry. She's thrilled her employment status has been recognised by a court.
It's just amazing, I think, to finally be recognised as employees, when there was always the question was what if, we weren't, but to finally be recognised along with all of the rest of New Zealand and being given those rights that everyone else, has, it's just amazing. It's huge. It's a massive accomplishment for us.
She hopes the ruling is a catalyst for change at Gloriavale.
You know, that working conditions change, people are given the right and freedom of choice and the right to have a voice like we now have.
Another of the women who brought the case, Pearl Vale, says she feels vindicated.
It feels pretty incredible to be heard, acknowledged and believed.
She's also striving for cultural change at Gloriavale.
Gloriavale feels like they're victims in this case, and they are victims, but not of this case. They're victims of the culture they've created, and that's what we want to see changed.
The Employment Court's Chief Judge, Christina Ingalls, noted the women's work was unrelenting, grinding, hard and physically and psychologically demanding. She found they did the work because they were told to. It was what they'd been trained to accept from birth, and the consequences of failing to do so were dire. Exclusion from the community and into a world they'd been taught to fear. The women's barrister, Brian Henry, says Gloriavale is built on child labour.
And basically smells like slavery, sounds like slavery, in my opinion is slavery.
Brian Henry says the government has been missing in action, and he's disgusted Crown Law signed off on the Labour Inspectorate's 2021 finding that members were volunteers.
How did they let their name go into a report published by the Inspectorate saying women born into slavery are volunteers? No one volunteers to be a slave, and they were cast from birth.
Rose Standtrue, whose partner Levi Courage was involved in a similar ruling last year, says she wants a better life for her 11 siblings who still live at Gloriavale.
My main goal for doing this was for my family who is still in there, for my little sisters, so they never have to grow up and face the things that I faced. I want them to be safe, I want them to have choices, I want them to have freedom.
Another of the plaintiffs, Virginia Courage, says the judgment will have a big impact on the women and girls who still live there.
They're our friends, they're our family, and that's why it's so important to us. And we're thrilled with the judgment. We're thrilled to know that we do have rights. We're thrilled to know that the women in Gloriavale have now got rights, and they must be acknowledged.
Gloriavale intends to appeal against the decision, saying it has significant and wide-ranging implications, including how faith-based communities, iwi and whānau choose to live and structure their household responsibilities.
And if you were listening to that story on radio, the video version will be on our webpage. It's 11 minutes after 5. Kia mau tonu mai, do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Sluggish ticket sales for the Women's World Cup has prompted FIFA to offer up 20,000 tickets for free. The tournament is co-hosted between New Zealand and Australia and kicks off in Auckland next week. But ticket sales have been very slow on this side of the Tasman, with hundreds of thousands still up for grabs. FIFA has partnered with Xero to offer 5,000 tickets to a game in each of Auckland, Hamilton, Wellington and Dunedin. Our reporter Bill Hickman and cameraman Samuel Rillstone have the story.
The FIFA Women's World Cup is on track to be the biggest women's sporting event ever seen. Chief Executive Dave Beach says a week out from the first New Zealand matches, sales are ramping up exponentially. He hopes the offer of thousands of free seats for 4 games in each of the country's host cities will see even more people making sure they are a part of the party.
We're ahead of where we thought we'd be. We're ahead of where most major events are a week out leading into the tournament. So this is all about enhancing the celebration of the women's game and making this even bigger than it's already going to be.
Kylie Valentine's family already have their tickets for the opening game in Auckland and a pool game in Hamilton. She says both her children play football and they're looking forward to seeing some international quality matches close to home.
We did it because we wanted to get behind it, and we thought that the opening would be a really special, occasion. It's kind of a momentous, occasion for the kids, and we wanted them to be part of it. I don't feel annoyed at all that we've spent money on them.
Richard Peters says he's been underwhelmed by the publicity surrounding the tournament.
It hasn't really been that well advertised, we thought. The kids sort of had forgotten about it, and then we mentioned it again the other day and they got excited, but the reality of it will set in closer to the date.
And these teen football players agree.
I feel like women's football is really undervalued compared to the hype around the FIFA World Cup, because we're hosting the Women's World Cup and there's no banners, no posters, lots of people don't even know it's happening.
Melbourneite Anton Victoria says the free tickets are a great way to add to the momentum of ticket sales. He says he hopes to see a few games in support of the Matildas when he gets back to Australia.
It's a good deal because, rather than paying for it, taking the effort to go buy tickets, if it's available for free, it'll encourage more people to come in, and then that'll kind of, boost the spirit, and then obviously you'll have more people, joining the crowd.
Dave Beach says tickets will not be available at the gates, so fans need to get online soon to make sure they don't miss out.
We're encouraging everyone to buy their tickets in advance of the day and get in early, get the seats sorted and come along and have a seamless entry into the stadium.
Less than half an hour after they went online, all 5,000 tickets for Spain versus Costa Rica in Wellington had already been snatched up.
Again, if you were listening to that story on radio, don't forget to check out the video on our webpage. I'm really interested to know, will you be going to any FIFA games? Why or why not? And if you're not living in one of the cities hosting games, how are you feeling about it? Any footy fever in your town? Do text us 2101 or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And I think someone's already getting in touch about this, hot off the press, saying if you speak to someone about the FIFA ticket sales, suggests that they allow walk-up gate sales on the day for specific games. Nothing to lose and a lot to gain. Yeah, what's the problem with that, having to book your tickets in advance? Let us know your thoughts on that one too. 2101 on text. The Prime Minister is on his way home from Europe after a whirlwind trip and will land right in the middle of a tax debate of his own making. After two bruising polls, Chris Hipkins is fighting to get Labor back on message, beginning by ruling out a wealth tax or a CGT under his leadership. But if those ideas are off the table, then what might be on it? Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
A frantic frenzy to finish the PM's trip to Europe. Chris Hipkins scrambling to make his flight home after waiting for a sit-down with Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky in Lithuania. In the end, the wait was too long. The wartime leader had a more pressing engagement, a meeting with the American Pres Joe Biden, which ran over time. Chris Hipkins had to settle for second best, a corridor conversation on his way out the door.
All the best, good luck. All right, and to you too. Thank you.
From there, it was straight to the airport and on, the pressures of election year demanding a swift return to matters much closer to home.
New Zealanders want to see us focused on the issues that they're very concerned about at the moment.
It's yet another admonition to his party after two polls this week put Labor down near 30% and unable to cobble together the numbers to govern. The cost of living is clearly weighing on the party's popularity, and Chris Hipkins is now dumping any potential vulnerabilities.
The Labor Party won't be supporting a wealth tax.
Tax has proven a touchy subject for the Labor Party of past, with former leaders failing to sell the population on various forms of a CGT. Mr Hipkins does not back himself to do better, retreating to the position proposed by Jacinda Ardern. Not on my watch.
Now's not the time for a massive, radical new tax, particularly given the current economic situation the country faces.
But some of his colleagues clearly felt differently. His Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, had dreamt up a tax switch of sorts for this year's budget, a new wealth tax to help pay for a tax-free zone at the bottom end. Chris Hipkins killed it. He says his caucus was briefed. No cracks in his cabinet.
No, none at all.
Clearly it's an idea that I thought had merit. I also understand the business that I'm in.
The business of politics, the business of winning elections. Grant Robertson now has to come up with another tax plan, but the PM's commitment leaves limited options by ruling out major new taxes. He's effectively also ruled out any significant tax cuts elsewhere.
I'm not going to play the rule in, rule out game, but you're right. A big program of tax cuts in the current economic environment with the revenue sources that we largely have are not affordable.
The economist Brad Olsen from Infometrics fears Labor has now restricted itself to the point it could make ill-advised tax decisions, like tinkering with GST.
Politics has always trumped economics when it comes to tax settings. And although we've been saying for a long time that the easiest and cleanest way would be to introduce something like a capital gains tax, it seems like there's a huge aversion to that, which leaves much less satisfactory options on the table.
What's certain is that tax will be a battleground this election, no matter how much Labor wants to neutralise the topic. No other party is going to let it.
Can we afford to cut tax? Yes, we can, but it starts with cutting waste.
What you don't do is you don't tax your way out of recession.
Poverty is a political choice.
What is his other solution?
More on that in the weeks to come.
Alrighty, feedback on the tax situation already. This person says New Zealand has a capital gains tax. It's called the Bright Line tax, says Gary. Another person says unbelievably angry, apoplectic in fact, that Labour considered a tax-free threshold and dumped it. Makes a mockery of their promises of transformational government. Makes a mockery of their proclaimed desire to reduce inequality and makes a mockery of their promise to alleviate poverty. Now, on the subject of tickets for the FIFA World Cup, this person says, nope, not attending or watching, will never support FIFA. Another one in, can't go to any matches. There are no games in Christchurch. There's about 50,000 people who'd love the chance. Who decided that, says Melanie. Final in Sydney, says another person, it's brilliant. I'll be there at every game with my Wigan New Zealand supporters club membership. And another person says, yep, after 2 matches in Dunedin, so good to see support for the world's biggest game and something other than bloody rugby. And this one too, I've got my tickets to the Costa Rica versus Spain game. It took over 2 hours to get the free tickets. Okay, you got on board with that. I'm also looking forward to New Zealand versus the Philippines game. It's exciting for Wellington to be a host city, as most other international events are either in Christchurch, the cricket, they say, or Auckland, the Women's Rugby World Cup. And this one too from Martin Brown, who says they've got tickets to 5 games, including the final. Love it. So all positive feedback there. Do keep it coming. Homai or whakaaro, we would love your thoughts on anything you've heard on the programme this evening, whether it's the FIFA World Cup or the decision regarding the Gloriavale women. They are employees, not volunteers, the court has heard. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time to go to the headlines now, and Marama is here.
Thank you very much, Lisa. The overseeing shepherd of the Gloriavale Christian community, Howard Temple, says they intend to appeal an employment court ruling that today found 6 former members were employees, not volunteers, when they worked on its domestic teams. Chief Judge Christina Ingalls found the women had been taught from birth to submit to male leadership in all aspects of life. FIFA is giving away 20,000 tickets for the Women's World Cup football tournament, which kicks off in Auckland next week. 5,000 free tickets will be available online for matches in Auckland, Hamilton, Wellington and Dunedin. Nearly 900,000 tournament tickets are on sale, but so far only about a third have been bought. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins can expect questions over Labour's tax policy when he arrives home from the NATO summit in Europe. He's ruled out capital gains or wealth taxes while he's a leader. Labour is expected to unveil in the coming weeks the tax policy it will take to the election. A helicopter pilot who was on Whakaari White Island when it erupted in December 2019 has told the Auckland District Court how jumping into the water saved him from any severe injuries. Brian DePau is one of the WorkSafe witnesses giving testimony in the trial against the island's owners and 2 tourism operators. And in Fiji, 2 police officers have been put on leave for allegedly attempting to rape a female officer on Vanua Level, the country's second largest island. We'll have more news at 5:40.
Ngā mihi. Relieved and vindicated, that is the response of 6 former Gloriavale women found by the court to be employees. Serenity Pilgrim, Anna Courage, Rose Stantrue, Crystal Loyal, Pearl Valor and Virginia Courage took leaders of the Christian community to the employment court, arguing they lived in servitude and were not volunteers. The women who were born into the West Coast commune started working at around 6 years old, and as teenagers they were groomed to leave school and do unrelenting grinding and hard work, something the court ruling says has left deep scars. Community leaders maintained they were volunteers doing domestic duties in the service of God and the community. Barrister Brian Henry led the legal team in the case against Gloriavale, and he joins us now. Kia ora, Brian. How significant is this decision?
It's very significant because this is the first step in us trying to take government departments to task. And we've achieved it.
So you're referring to the fact that the Labour Inspectorate had been to the community previously and said, no, these people are not workers, they're not employees, they're volunteers. Given the court decision, how could that department get it so wrong?
Well, the troubling thing is that Crown Law signed off that opinion as well, and if anybody's read what we believe, you know, the judge said in the Courage trial, cursory reading sets off alarm bells, or read it properly, and there is a recipe there for what I believe is slavery, particularly of women, and that's what they've done. They've built their model on child labour, they've built their labour on the servitude of women, and that's how they're making an awful lot of money, as she says. There's a lot of money in the place, but it's not going to the community. It's just, to me, putting people into servitude, and that's just not part of the New Zealand society.
Tell us a bit more about what these women were required to do and from what ages.
Well, from birth they see a path through to cooking, cleaning and sewing, and the moment they've been old enough to come out of school and do it, they have. Any so-called workplace training has simply been cooking, cleaning, sewing, and the teams were on a rotation of every 4 days, and each day they had a different job. First was food prep, second was cooking the food, third was cleaning, and fourth was laundry. And that was their day. Every 4 days it just changed and changed. No holidays, no weekends. It just continued, and they had a week off and leave.
Basically, the court has found that they had no power to say no, right? And that there was the threat of punishment for disobedience and also, well, the ultimate punishment of being sent to hell if you didn't obey the rules of God and the Bible. Can you talk to us a bit about that as well? The messages that the women were getting?
The whole thing was they lived in fear, and the fear was of no afterlife. And if you left Gloriavale, there's no afterlife. And the punishments were you could be taken into shepherds and servants meetings. We had a tape of one of the meetings which she heard, and they're abusive meetings. And the whole aim is no place for women. And actually in that interview, the wife of the person interviewed was told, "You're a woman, what are you doing talking here?" Women were treated as third-rate citizens. But it goes worse than that, because the judges actually found, I'm going to read you a bit from the judgment, the overseeing shepherd went further, accepting that children are educated so that they're not equipped for the outside world, and that part of the leadership strategy is to ensure that children are kept separate from the outside world in order to keep them within the community. So they were educated entrapment. Right, how does the ERO, who's regulating the school, work that out with their report saying this is a good school, which we've heard? This is a school training slaves. And we've got a government agency saying that's okay? Or didn't they recognise it? Now, I'm like you, how did the Labour Inspectorate, these are experts, go there and not see what was going on? They can work it out when they go to these ethnic groups that they've been chasing around for slavery. Why didn't they see it going into this so-called Christian organisation? Are they blinded by Christianity, or are they looking at reality? The reality here is these are enslaved women.
Given your view on that, and the ruling, is there a criminal matter in this? This is a matter for the police?
I can't talk about that, but what I can say is that the police are actually doing their job in Gloriavale well, but you've got to remember, these children from birth are taught, do not talk to authorities, do not talk to the police, do not go outside the community. So the police are having to work and build witnesses out of a very difficult background. And I know for a fact in some of the trials they have members of Gloriavale turn up, and these are people the judge talks about who have been trained to smile and like all this hard work, saying, oh no, it's all love, peace and beads. So they're working hard. There are prosecutions which are suppressed. I can't go into it, but the Crown Attorney General cross-examining the shepherds at the end of the trial did say there were inquiries by the police on this line, but that's all I know.
The judge, in essence, has ruled that a contract did exist between these women and the leaders or the community as such. The reward for the work was being able to stay in the community, be fed and watered and clothed, provided with accommodation. Does that mean they have been paid, or are you expecting them to be due wages?
Yeah, let's just come back. The court actually doesn't find a contract, it finds an employment relationship. And it says the employment relationship is there. That brings in the minimum standards, which includes wages, tea breaks, blah, 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 blah. So, yes, they do have a claim now to be back paid if they wish to take that against the community. You have to remember that some will, some won't, because the motivation on some of them is about their brothers and sisters and friends still in the community. So the rules inside the community have seriously changed for the shepherds, and of course that's why they want to appeal, because for them, and their evidence was, this will destroy the fabric of the community. It won't destroy the fabric of the community. Christianity can survive this. What it destroys is a community based on child labour and female slave labour. Those are two totally unrelated issues, and Christianity might be the motive, but their intention is to live off child labour and off women's slavery.
Really appreciate
and they make an awful lot of money off these people.
Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate your time, Brian. That is Barrister Brian Henry. Now, he led that legal team in the case against Gloria Vale. That's the 6 women who today the court have ruled were employees, not volunteers, at that West Coast community. The greatest rivalry in rugby reignites this weekend as the world champion Springboks come to town to take on the All Blacks in Auckland. In what is shaping as the biggest test for the All Blacks outside of the World Cup, both teams will be looking to make a statement ahead of another possible meeting in France. And joining us now is sports reporter Jonty Dine. OK, Jonty, first home test for the All Blacks. It's pretty significant, isn't it?
It is, yeah. No, the stage is certainly set for another classic between these two rivals. Both teams obviously coming off big 40-point wins to open up the Rugby Championship, and so they're going to be firing. Now, the Springboks have had several frontline players in Auckland since last week, sort of to acclimatise to that lovely Auckland weather. So, I mean, it shows how seriously they're taking this test. The All Blacks do have a debutant, so that's Crusaders prop Mighty Williams. He is from a small town in Northern Kaio, and he speaking to him today, it was an incredibly emotional time for him and his whānau. Also returning to lineup will be Mark Talia and Will Jordan, back from injury. So they'll have the task of containing Cheslin Kolbe, who is, of course, probably one of the most dangerous players in world rugby at the moment. Richie Mo'unga, Brodie Retallick, Cody Taylor, they're all back. So this is a pretty strong All Blacks lineup. And now Ian Foster said it was always his plan to swap his first fives following the opening round. It wasn't a case of McKenzie playing himself out of the side. He was very pleased with how McKenzie performed in Mendoza, but it is just Richie's turn to take the reins this weekend. Now, it's of course likely to be a big step up in physicality for both sides, and hooker Cody Taylor, he says he's certainly not one to back down from that challenge, and he says the All Black forwards are bracing for a pretty brutal battle.
Yeah, right across the board, they play bloody good footy, and they're big men. They're not small, so it's no better challenge as an All Black to go against a South African forward pack like they have. Mentally, you got to get yourself in a pretty dark place to be ready for what's coming.
So, as Cody mentioned, these are always pretty ferocious test matches. I mean, think back 1956, Kevin Skinner coming into the boxer Kevin Skinner coming in to take on the Springbok front row. Bismarck du Plessis dislocating Dan Carter's shoulder with that monstrous hit. Dean Grayling's cheap shot on Richard McCaw, the forearm, I think we all remember that. I mean, anytime these two sides play, players tend to walk away with a few extra scars than they came in with, Lisa. So Saturday night should be no different. But on a more sombre note, there's been some pretty tragic news out of South Africa. So their skipper, Eben Etzebeth, his father Harry sadly passed away on Tuesday night after a battle with an illness. Now the Springboks have yet to confirm whether or not their skipper will fly home or will take the field on Saturday night. And Ian Foster said it will be a massive blow if Eben does fly home, but obviously an understandable one.
Both Richie and Damien pretty excited with their form at the end of the super season.
really pleased with Damien. I think we stated why we started Damien last week. Felt as a chance to get him in there. He's been out for a long time. Really enjoyed his game. They both had big minutes in Super Rugby, amongst the highest out of all our backs. And now it's Richie's turn.
So that was actually Foster explaining his swap of first fives. But he also did say that obviously the team was really feeling for Eben and they wished him all the best in this time. Now, whether he plays or not in the test match, it's going to be a really strong South African side that takes the field. So all things are set for a cracker, Lisa, that's for sure.
Buckle up, Jonty. Thank
Absolutely.
you for that. Sports reporter Jonty Dine there. It is 27 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It is, of course, time for the business news with Giles Beckford. Ko taku hoa NINA called Giles Beckford. And no business report would be complete without a side dish of misery. So who's miserable today, please, Giles?
Who says it's a side dish? This is the main course at the moment. I'm sorry, Lisa. Kia to you. It's from the manufacturing sector. It's the monthly real-time survey that's done by the BNZ and Business New Zealand. For the fourth month in a row, manufacturing sector has contracted. So activity is down, production is lower, new orders are lower. The employment index is weak as well, all of which points to pretty slack activity for the sector and going into the end of the year. So you can see here already that this is the economic slowdown in action in real time. Allied to that was numbers that came out today about retail sales using electronic cards. Now, it's only a partial indicator of retail spending, but it shows there was a pretty insipid increase of just 1% for the past month. It had fallen the month before. That too suggests that consumers are pulling their heads in. So put the manufacturing survey and the retail spending numbers together, and we paint a picture, a continuing picture of an economy which is scraping along the bottom. And for those who might think it's we're not doing too badly, yes, people have jobs, but it's likely to stay this way. And this is part of the effect of the Reserve Bank's rate rises of the past couple of years.
OK, let's stick with the theme of serving stuff up. Storming food prices will be driving next week's inflation numbers.
Indeed,
that's scary.
we've got numbers out today from Stats NZ. Food inflation for the month was 1.6%. And for the year, 12.5%. That was back up to a 36-year high, the highest since 1987 when GST was brought in. And it's largely down to fresh fruit and veggies. Essentially, that bad weather has just pummeled production of things like tomatoes and kumara and spuds and lettuces and the like. Groceries, by comparison, were almost sedate, just an 8% rise for groceries. And so food prices make up about a fifth, just under 20% of the consumer price index. On these numbers, you've got to figure that it will be, they'll be the main driver of second quarter inflation numbers. The consensus is settling at around just under 1% for the quarter, the annual rate falling from 6.7% at the end of March to around 6%, perhaps a whisker underneath it for the 3 months ended June. It's lower inflation, it's not low inflation. There's a lot more to come on this rocky road.
And Giles, the market numbers, please.
A nice rebound for the local top 50 market, top 50 index, I should say. Up 105 points, just under 1%. It's sneaked over the 12,000 level. The New Zealand dollar got a bit of a spring in its step. 63.3 US cents and 92.9 Australian. That's business for a short week. Have a great break.
It's good that someone's got a spring in their step, Giles. Thank you for that. Giles Beckford live with Business News there. It is 23 minutes away from 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ And your feedback is flooding in on all sorts of things. Let's start with tax. This person says many OECD countries are moving away from wealth taxes. It's because they don't work, reckons D. Someone else says we need a CGT. All other OECD countries can't be wrong. There you go, both sides of the coin. Another person says Labour's just lost the election. New Zealand's poor, needs CGT. Another says perhaps dumping a wealth tax or similar actually makes a mockery of our society with our egalitarian and fairness ideals when they do not support fairness in taxing wealth. Julie from Christchurch says, would the people of New Zealand realise that for a nation of 5.5 million, we are limited in what we can do with taxes and government spending? We have had earthquakes, mosque attacks, severe flooding and cyclones. Where do people expect us to pay for all of that? Let's be real. We do pretty good for a small country, she says. On the subject of Gloriavale, and this is the 6 women who took an employment court case, the court has found that they're employees, not volunteers. They were workers. This person says a volunteer is someone who chooses to volunteer their service. They have a choice and can volunteer or not. I don't feel like working today, sorry, or I'd like to work in Greymouth now. Can I please go? Another says, I visited Gloriavale on several occasions on business, went through the kitchen a couple of times, and the girls working in the kitchen were working hard and automated in their actions. I was saddened to see how sad they looked when so young and should be the best part of their lives. Another says, Gloriavale describes itself as a Christian organisation. It is not. Any sensible person can see they use Christian words but do not follow Christian principles. Do keep your feedback coming. Don't forget, you can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time for us to go to the headlines now. Ane Amarama, mina pita pita kōrero.
Thank you very much, Lisa. The barrister for the 6 former Gloriavale women who today won their legal case against the Christian community is praising their bravery. The employment courts ruled the 6 were employees when they worked on Gloriavale's domestic teams and not volunteers. Brian Henry told Checkpoint the women had lived in fear and were treated as third-rate citizens. A Whakaari White Island survivor says tourism brochures gave her no warning of the risks and she was not told about the eruption in 2016. Annie Liu, who had almost 40% of her body burnt in the 2019 eruption, is one of WorkSafe's witnesses in the trial of the island's owners and 2 tourism operators. New Te Whatu Ora figures show thousands more patients are waiting longer than they should for treatment. The number of people in Auckland waiting more than 4 months for a specialist appointment doubled in the year to March to more than 7,500. There's been similar increases in counties Manukau, Waitemata and Canterbury. A ticket holder for the FIFA Women's World Cup says she's not unhappy that organisers have today released 20,000 freebies. Kylie Valentine's family have tickets for games in Auckland and Hamilton, but she says they're keen to try to score some more. And wildlife officials in California are trying to capture a sea otter that's been attacking surfers and hijacking their boards. Surfers in the Santa Cruz area are being warned to avoid the female, which is said to have been harassing surfers for weeks. We'll have more news at 6, Lisa.
Kia ora rā e ho. An Air Force plane has flown low over Palmerston North to say a special happy birthday. World War II veteran Eddie Chapman is turning 100 today. Quite an achievement for a man who spent his 21st birthday in a German prisoner of war camp. Jimmy Allingham reports.
The T-6C Texan twice circled above Eddie Chapman's house before pilot Paul Stockley radioed a crackly happy birthday message to one of the last remaining World War II veterans. Born in England, Mr Chapman signed up to the RAF, where he flew 10 completed missions, sitting in the nose and dropping bombs over Europe. His Lancaster was shot down near the Germany-Belgium border on its 11th mission in June 1944.
Yeah, I had to pull the escape hatch, and the escape hatch was because of that chair. Now I had to dive out so the others could come behind me, but the pilot went down with the plane. Another one was wound round the tail, and he, of course, went down with the burning plane. And another one's parachute didn't open, so there was 4 of us got out and 3 were killed.
Mr. Chapman landed safely, having recited the Lord's Prayer on the way down. After 2 days, he was captured and sent to a POW camp, where he remained for about a year until, as the war neared its end, they were marched across Germany.
And that's where a lot of chappies, some of them that had been prisoners 3 or 4 years, they were not as able as I was. And there was a lot of them were frostbitten and things like that, and you were hungry. Oh, well, the Germans got us bread occasionally, but otherwise you had to live off the land, like on turnips and things like that.
Near Berlin, the POWs hoped they weren't bombed by their own planes.
The war finished and we were flown back eventually to England. That was good to see the White Cliffs of Dover coming up.
Mr. Chapman moved to New Zealand in the early 1950s, where he married Jill and became a farmer. Daughter Jane Roy there couldn't be more proud of her father.
He spent his 21st birthday in a German prison camp. Now, if you think about our youth of today, they've got no idea what life is really like if you consider what the young men of that era went through.
A surprise guest at today's surprise birthday party is Frank Haslam. His father, Frank Haslam Sr., flew with Mr. Chapman and survived the 1944 crash.
When Jane said that this celebration was coming up, I thought, well, it's now or never, so off I go to New Zealand. And it's wonderful to see him in such fine form. If I ever get to 100, I'll try and be like him.
Mr. Haslam Sr. and Mr. Chapman lost contact for a while, but renewed their friendship and spoke every year on the anniversary of being shot down until Mr. Haslam Sr.'s death in 2009.
And I said, well, just get on the train and go up to New Zealand House, which is what Dad did. And they brought him electoral registers, and he found some C.E. Chapmans, sent off some telegrams, because this was before the days of the internet, and he got one back from Eddie saying words to the effect of, bang on target.
Also bang on target and a nice touch, today's Texan pilot, squadron leader Paul Stockley, has previously served in the same RAF squadron, 207, as Mr. Chapman. Mr. Stockley says the flypast is a tribute to Mr. Chapman's part in the war effort.
Those are experiences that I think would be very hard for us to relate to, and hence why it's very important to remember exactly what they went through to help ensure that we are able to live in what I consider the best country in the world the way we do today.
Mr. Chapman puts his longevity down to Viking blood and says he's overwhelmed with the focus on him today. With 5 children, 15 grandchildren and 20 great-grandchildren, he's likely to have plenty more attention as he, in his words, reaches 100 not out.
Jimmy Allingham reporting there. It's 5:45. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. St John is encouraging people who can do CPR to download an app which could save hundreds of lives each year. The Good Sam app alerts nearby people when someone's having a cardiac arrest, something which happens about 5 times a day in New Zealand. If someone with the app can help, it almost doubles the person's survival rate. At the moment, half the people signed up are ambulance officers, but if you can do CPR, you can join too. Tony Smith is the Deputy Clinical Director of Hatohone St John and joins us now. Kia ora, Tony.
Good evening.
How does it work?
So if you're within a kilometre of a person that we've identified during the 111 call as likely to be in cardiac arrest, and you've downloaded the Good Sam app, your phone will go off with a little siren noise, alerting you. It will show you the location of the person who's believed to be in cardiac arrest. It will also show you the location of the nearest AED or heart restarter. And then you can either choose to respond or choose not to respond. And if you respond and begin CPR prior to an ambulance arriving, and even better, if you can find and use the nearest AED or heart restarter, then you can double the chance of someone surviving from cardiac arrest.
Yeah, so how significant are those odds then, doubling?
Oh, this is absolutely significant. So as you said, 5 people every day somewhere in New Zealand suffer a cardiac arrest. That's where the heart suddenly stops beating, usually without warning. And it can happen to anyone of any age, including teenagers. And right now in New Zealand, only about just over 10% of those patients will survive. But we know that with early CPR from bystanders and ideally early use of an AED or heart restarter, that percentage could be doubled, saving hundreds of extra lives every year in New Zealand.
So when the alert goes out, Tony, if someone is nearby and capable of assisting, do they basically accept that alert and then they're the only one from the public that attends?
No, we will alert up to 3 Good Sam responders, but obviously in addition to the Good Sam responders, we're also sending ambulances and fire. And so fire crew and several ambulance crews will usually be a few minutes behind the Good Sam responders, but those extra few minutes are absolutely gold in helping save the patient's life.
I suppose that's a comforting thing, the fact that you could have others there to support you, the fact that you notify 3 people and potentially they're all turning up, because it could be quite scary for a person to do this. And I'm wondering how proficient you need to be in CPR to feel confident to sign on to the app.
So we encourage all New Zealanders to learn how to perform CPR. CPR is easy to learn and it's easy to do, and with it you can save a life. And 80% of all cardiac arrest occurs in the home. So you're most likely, in your lifetime, to need to perform CPR on somebody you know, like someone who's in your house or a neighbour. And our experience has been that even members of the public with CPR training can save lives. There is free CPR training available throughout New Zealand. So if you go to the St John website and look at 3 steps for life, 3 steps for life, call 111, start CPR, find and use the nearest AED or heart restarter, and all New Zealanders can help save a life.
Really appreciate your time, Tony. Thank you for joining us. That's Tony Smith, the Deputy Clinical Director of Hatohone St John, encouraging people there to sign up to the Good Sam app if you can do CPR. Māori tourism operators are welcoming more public awareness and interest in Matariki. Last year was the first time it was marked with a public holiday, and tomorrow Matariki events are organised around the motu. Tourism reporter Tess Brunton has more.
Before it became a public holiday, Sean Marsh from Te Puia says awareness of Matariki seemed low.
Since it became a public holiday, we've definitely noticed the public awareness is building, and it's very strong and it's very positive towards Matariki.
The start of the Māori New Year falls at a quieter time for overseas tourists, but Sean Marsh says there's a stronger desire for tourists and domestic travellers to connect to Indigenous culture. Te Puia is hosting Rotorua's community Matariki celebration, starting under the stars and finishing when the sun rises above the horizon.
It's a free local event, but as soon as that went public, I think we sold out within 2 days. So just gives you some indication of how, not only the awareness, but there is a really strong desire by all people just to sort of connect with Matariki, get a better understanding of it, and just be involved somehow.
He says it means a lot to see more people want to engage with Matariki.
It's just recognition that it's important for all of us to have a better understanding of, Matariki, of the maramataka, and just Indigenous knowledge in general.
Martin Langford from Ngaitahu Tourism says authentic cultural experiences are in high demand and people are willing to travel to experience them.
The Dark Sky project has seen a really significant increase of forward bookings over the Matariki and over the weekend. Many of those people that are visiting Takapau are coming for their Matariki Mackenzie Festival, which takes place. So that's a great driver for visitation to the region.
He expects Matariki celebrations will continue to grow in popularity.
I think it will become a really strong community festival that will showcase the importance of Matariki to domestic visitors, but also international visitors. Our unique culture is what sets us apart from the rest of the world in terms of an international country to visit, and Matariki is a great example of that.
In Ototahi, Amiki Tours lead guide Riwai Grace is glad that Matariki is becoming more widely celebrated. He says Australian and American tourists are very interested in learning Māori stories.
I'm loving the journey of learning more about Matariki, but also what it means for us as a country, and what it means showcasing it for our international travellers who are very positive to learn about our Māori stories, and why things happen, but also understanding moving forward.
He didn't learn about Matariki when he was at school, and it's been heartening to hear Rangatahi talk about it. He says it encourages others to want to listen and learn.
I personally think it's fantastic, especially for our tamariki and our mokopuna moving forward, where this potentially could help lead the country in reconnection, growth, understanding more than what you might have learnt when you were a child yourself.
Associate Minister for Arts, Culture and Heritage, Willow Jean Prime, says last year roughly half the population did something to celebrate Matariki, and that's expected to be higher this year.
Ears are so distinctive they are as effective as DNA or fingerprints in identifying someone, according to a new study. The research, in conjunction with Australia's La Trobe University, studied the appearance of more than 2,200 ears from 6 countries. So what are the implications and possible uses? Well, joining us now from La Trobe University is Dr. Sudhir Babu Bala. Hello, Doctor.
Hi, Lisa. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. People who've watched a crime show will know all about the sort of rings on your finger and points in a DNA strand. What makes ears so unique?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I will give you 3 reasons why they are unique. Firstly, they are relatively stable. What I mean to say is that they don't change with facial expressions and they don't change with facial emotions, and they are less affected by the makeup. And the second reason is that they are relatively larger in size when compared to other biometrics like fingerprints or retina, and then can be seen from a large distance, and they can be easily captured by the CCTV footages. And thirdly, research has already proved that it is a unique identifier for the individuals. So that makes them as one of the unique parameters.
So that people understand how distinctive they are, what are the odds, or how likely is it that 2 ears are the same?
Our study findings showed that the probability for the 2 subjects to have the same type of ear is less than 0.007, which is, that means that the accuracy of uniqueness is very high. And our research findings are supported by other research from University of Southampton, England. So they said that the accuracy is around 99.6%, which is relatively high. Like I said, the ears are very unique for each person, and the research has already proven that this uniqueness is reproducible. Yep.
Do identical twins have the same ears?
Exactly. So I'll say one thing. For example, if you have your family members next to you, just have a look at their ears. And this is interesting because 2 persons from the same family who are sharing the identical genetical makeup, their ears are totally different. And the research findings on the identical twins already proven that 2 twins, they do have similar ears, but not identical ears. That is really fascinating to know that the ears are unique that way, even for identical twins.
So you talked about CCTV, right? So is this all about facial recognition technology and AI in a criminal context? Is that where you see the use for this?
Yep. So the problem here is that the research on ears is not relatively new because it's been in the practice for more than 40 years. The problem here is that finding the CCTV footage with the profile image of the suspect is really challenging. But if you have that profile image showing the external surface of the ear, that can be useful for the forensic experts to extract some information from that ear, so that could be useful for them to make some identification of the suspects.
So won't they all just start wearing hats now?
That's a good one. The problem here is that most of the research which was done so far, it's in the controlled environment. What I mean to say is that we made the participants to sit on the table, take the photos, but the challenge is what we face is from the uncontrolled situations. Like you said, what if the people wear the hats? What if the ears are occluded by the hair? So we still have those troubles in the research that need to be taken care of. But even with such occlusion or wearing hats, we found out that the probability to identify the ears is around 70%, so which is relatively good, but not great. Yeah, like I said, still more research needed to be done in this area.
So I assume that you could also use it for victim identification then?
Yeah, we can use for just like the suspect identification, we also do use for victim identification as well.
Has evidence about ears been accepted by a court yet?
I would say that because if you say in some European countries, and I think also in Spain, they have a separate database on ears, and there are some cases where, for example, let's say there are some criminal cases where there is no other evidence available like fingerprints, and they have CCTV footage showing the profile images of the ears. There are some cases that happened in England or also in Spain where they used ears to identify the suspects. Some cases are there, but it's not everywhere as of now.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you for your time. That is Dr. Sudhir Babu Bala. And that is that research which basically says ears are unique and they're as effective as DNA and fingerprints in identifying people, criminals or victim identification. So many of you are getting in touch about the FIFA World Cup. This person says definitely excited about FIFA games, taking a crew of kids to the quarterfinal in Wellington to inspire them, and planning to study the New Zealand team. Have seen some cool online ads introducing our players and their international credentials. That one's from Deborah. Jason in Christchurch says, I'm guessing there are no games in Christchurch. You guessed correctly. Otherwise, I would have seen some advertising. I also thought it was next year. Oh, well, no time to plan now. Best of luck to whoever is playing. This one says, sports fans in various markets have their own preferences. Here we have FIFA dictatorially requiring there be no sales at the ground on the day. This is crazy. If fans want to buy early on the day, then accept that is how many Kiwis do it. I don't know what the big problem is there. Why can't you order them ahead of time? Another person says, keen to take the kids. We live in Auckland. So painful having to register with another website instead of using normal ticketing platforms.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Kamna Māori, I'm Marama Tipole. The lawyer for the 6 former Gloriavale women is praising the group's bravery in bringing the case to court. The employment court found the 6 former members were employees working on Gloriavale's domestic teams. Chief Judge Christina Ingalls released her decision earlier this afternoon. The women took Gloriavale's leaders to court, arguing they lived in servitude, preparing food, cooking, cleaning and doing the laundry from the age of about 15. The plaintiff's lawyer, Brian Henry, today paid tribute to the women.
It's all about instances of power and control. But the thing is, they were taught not to challenge. They were taught not to go to authorities. They were taught not to go to the police, not to go to courts. So they've had to overcome a lifetime of teaching to stand up in the witness box, and that is courage.
Gloriavale intends to appeal the court ruling. A helicopter pilot who was on Whakaari White Island when it erupted says he feared he wouldn't survive the blast. Brian DePauw is one of WorkSafe's witnesses giving testimony in the trial against the island's owners and 2 tourism operators at Auckland District Court today. Mr. DePauw was one of the guides taking tour groups to the island the day of the disaster. In a pre-recorded video played at court, he said he instructed his tour group to run to the water as the crater erupted.
I looked behind me and I just saw the plume going up 1,000 or 2,000 feet high. I saw boulders and debris arcing towards us. So I said, run to the water.
Brian DePauw says jumping into the water saved his life as the surge of heat and ash washed over them. Labour is expected to release its election tax policy soon, but an economist says the party doesn't have many options. Chris Hipkins yesterday confirmed Labour won't introduce a capital gains or wealth tax. Infometrics chief economist Brad Olsen says the party could tinker with corporate profit tax or GST.
The challenge I see is that if there is somewhere that the government does want to make changes on the tax, it might well decide to tinker with the GST system. Such a change would be the wrong move economically, but politically might well be in more focus. It would, however, in my mind, put the government's economic credentials on the bonfire.
National says Labour can't be trusted on tax policy. A BBC investigation has found evidence that casts further doubt on the Greek Coast Guard's account of the migrant boat sinking in the Mediterranean a month ago. 82 people are confirmed to have drowned, but it's feared a further 500 may have died. Here's the BBC's Nick Beak.
In Athens, we met two survivors who alleged in detail how Greek officials caused their boat to capsize in a disastrous attempt to tow it. They claimed they were told to shut up when they tried to speak out, and instead asked to implicate 9 Egyptians who'd been arrested on people smuggling charges. We've also seen court documents that show that in initial interviews recorded by the Coast Guard, 5 other survivors did not mention a rope, but that they later told a judge there had been a failed attempt to tow their boat. Both the Greek government and the Coast Guard refused an interview and did not respond to our specific allegations.
Back home, the Principals Federation is worried too many experienced principals are quitting the job. A report from the Education Review Office released today says more than a third of principals have less than 5 years' experience, and most do not feel ready for the job when they start it. Principals Federation President Leanne Ortene says new and current principals need more support.
We've got quite a turnover in the profession, and that is a worry because we need those experienced principals to mentor and to coach our younger principals.
Leanne Ortene says new principals need more access to professional development. Te Whatu Ora has reported back to the health watchdog on what it has done to improve cancer services in the far south. In April, the Health and Disability Commissioner issued a report finding patients had been harmed by years of long wait lists, poor communication and short-sighted leadership. The HDC wanted Te Whatu Ora's response by Tuesday. Te Whatu Ora said earlier this week it's met all of the critical elements the HDC wanted and is now working on longer-term fixes. The HDC says it will take some time to review what it has been told. A Russian general says he's been dismissed as a commander after telling the military leadership about the dire situation at the front in Ukraine. Major General Ivan Popov, who commanded the 58th Combined Arms Army, says in a voice message published by Russian lawmaker Andrei Gurylyov that he had been dismissed. He says Russian soldiers had been stabbed in the back by the failings of the top military brass. There was no immediate comment from the Defence Ministry, and Reuters news agency is unable to verify the authenticity of the voice message. It appears farm machinery sales manager Andy Fraser will fill the Gore District Council's vacant seat. In the preliminary result, Mr Fraser leads Stephen Hamlin by 61 votes, with 31 special votes to be processed. The by-election was triggered when Brett Heisted resigned just a few months into his 6th term on the council, citing stress and anxiety. Gore District Council has been beset by controversy since the then 23-year-old Ben Bell was elected as mayor last October. The election's final result is expected late Monday. And to sport, there are 5 changes to the All Blacks starting 15 for Saturday's test against South Africa in Auckland. After the straightforward 41-12 win over Argentina in Mendoza last Sunday, coach Ian Foster has named lock Brodie Retallick, first 5 Richie Mo'unga and wingers Mark Telea and Will Jordan for their first tests of the year. Hooker Cody Taylor, who came off the bench against the Pumas, is the other change to the starting lineup, replacing Dane Coles. That's the news.
This Saturday morning, award-winning and very funny writer Caitlin Moran's mission is to save men from the patriarchy. And from Andrew Tate, Ben Smith, former editor-in-chief of the later BuzzFeed News, says the social platform age is over. But whatever made him think Facebook was a friend of journalism in the first place, Patsy Carlisle owns 1,300 Barbies, maybe 2,000. It's a lot. Call Kim Hillaho. Join me Saturday morning from 8 on RNZ National.
RNZ National, funded through New Zealand On Air. Back to Lisa Owen and Checkpoint in a moment, but right now the short forecast from Met Service through to midnight Friday. In the west from Northland to Kapiti, including Coromandel and the Central High Country. Isolated showers, more widespread with coastal thunderstorms possible south of Waikato this evening. Showers clearing south of Whanganui for a time overnight. Now for the remainder of the North Island, mostly fine. A few showers this evening and again tomorrow afternoon in Bay of Plenty. Nelson and Marlborough, partly cloudy. For Canterbury, partly cloudy. Isolated showers tomorrow morning and afternoon. For Buller, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain or showers, some possibly heavy. Otago and Southland, scattered showers, becoming isolated tomorrow for your Matariki, then retreating to the south coast in the evening. For the Chatham Islands, squally showers with possible thunderstorms, easing tonight, a few showers for tomorrow, turning to rain for a time in the afternoon. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6. We'll have our headlines at 6:30.
Kia ora rā e ho. No mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Everybody run. An Australian tourist has recounted the terrifying experience of being on Whakaari White Island when it erupted. This week, Auckland District Court has heard at times graphic accounts of what happened on the ground during the eruption and the lasting impact it's had on victims. A warning, aspects of this story are distressing. Our reporter Finn Blackwell was there at court.
Annie Lou was visiting the island with her mother while on holiday from Australia. In a pre-recorded video, she recalled the moment the island erupted.
Mum decided to take one last photo of the crater, and she was like, "Oh, look at that!" And then Elsie turned around and she screamed, "Oh my God! Everybody run!" And that was when the explosion happened.
Both she and her mum were quickly engulfed by ash as the surge overtook them.
I remember hearing Mum scream for my name, and then everything just went dark. There was a big gas, this big wind that just knocked us for 6, and just so much pain.
Annie suffered burns to 38% of her body and described hearing the screams from her fellow victims as they travelled back from Whakaari and to hospital.
The screaming grew a lot more and the crying grew a lot more in the boat. And I remember asking for Mum.
She says it's had a lasting effect on her.
Yeah, it's changed everything, basically.
3 members of the Buttle family who own the island are defending charges on health and safety failings alongside their company, Whakaari Management Limited. 2 companies that booked and marketed tours to cruise ship passengers are also facing charges. Annie Lou was cross-examined by ID Tours lawyer David Neutzer, who thanked her for appearing today.
I want to acknowledge both personally and on behalf of my client the devastating effects that we know that this eruption has had on you and your mum and your family, and will continue to do so.
Also appearing in court today was Brian DePauw, a helicopter pilot who took one of the tour groups to the island on the day of the eruption. The tour company he works for, Volcanic Air, has already pleaded guilty to charges. In his pre-recorded video, he said he instructed his tour group to run to the water.
I looked behind me and I just saw the plume going up 1,000 or 2,000 feet high. I saw boulders and debris arcing towards us. So I said, run to the water.
In court, Mr. DePauw said he wasn't sure he could survive the eruption, but instinct told him to get in the water.
The water is what saved us from that steam, from that heat, from that exposure. So that's definitely what saved us that day.
The trial is set down for 4 months.
Finn Blackwell reporting there, 11 minutes past 6, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. G7 leaders have announced a new security pact with Ukraine. The agreement was reached on the sidelines of the NATO summit in Lithuania and pledges more military support for the country. The British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak heralded it as a new high point in the international support for Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stressed it wasn't a substitute for NATO membership, but said he was leaving the summit with a significant security victory for Ukraine. Here's the BBC's Katja Adler.
Our dear friend Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine. Welcome to you, Volodymyr. It's great to have you here.
Ukraine may not yet be a member of NATO, not by a long way.
But today it was embraced almost as one of their own, taking part in a new council where Kyiv can raise concerns on an equal footing.
We've discussed in detail the confrontation with Russia and what can be done to keep Ukrainians safer. We're grateful to our partners for promising new packages of security and defense.
This may look like a conveyor belt of schmoozing with world leaders, but you'll notice Ukraine's president always wears combat fatigues. All this glad-handing has a concrete purpose. Back home, President Zelensky's country is burning, 500 days into Russia's full-scale invasion. Ukrainians care a lot about NATO.
NATO is our only protection from Russia. Otherwise, they'll never leave us alone.
If they will not help us, I think the situation in our country will be much worse than now.
In the corridors of power here, there's been lots of debate about why now isn't the time to make Ukraine a full NATO member. But the big picture here is that Ukraine and its defense against Russia's aggression is the focus of all the leaders at this summit. They're pledging long-term humanitarian and military aid, and this despite all of those countries facing a cost of living crisis at home. It's a big deal. Such a big deal, the British Defence Secretary remarked today off camera. He advised Kyiv not to treat allies like an Amazon for weapons supplies. The Prime Minister said he was confident Ukraine's president understood.
I know he and his people are incredibly grateful for the support the UK has shown, the welcome that we've provided to many Ukrainian families, but also the leadership that we've shown throughout this conflict.
A conflict NATO leaders know could go on for a long time. Don't we need to be honest with people at home here, with voters? This could take years, couldn't it?
Wars are by nature unpredictable, so I think no one can say with certainty how long this war will last. What we do say or state very clearly is that we will stand by Ukraine for as long as it takes.
NATO is being careful not to pile pressure on Kyiv over its counter-offensive against Russia. It's tough and slow. The grim reality of war.
For 20 years, Hugh Edwards anchored the BBC's flagship News at 10 programme. He's now been named as the presenter at the centre of allegations he paid a young person for sexually explicit images. After days of speculation, Mr Edwards' wife issued a statement naming the presenter and revealing that he's being treated in hospital for serious mental health issues. Police say they found no evidence of criminality. Now, The Sun, which published the claims, has been criticised for its reporting of the story. The BBC's Katie Razzle reports.
Tonight at 10, we're in Edinburgh, where the King has been presented with the crown jewels of Scotland.
Named, and likely a huge shock to many viewers.
The ceremony was steeped in tradition.
Wednesday was the last time Hugh Edwards appeared on BBC News, that night from Edinburgh. The next day, the BBC quietly took him off air. Now, the secret that has been speculated upon across social media for days is public.
At the end of the month,
Hugh Edwards, the main face of the BBC's flagship News at 10 for 2 decades, is the presenter at the centre of allegations of misconduct. This evening, his wife, Vicky Flynn, released a statement naming her husband out of concern for his mental well-being and to protect our children. Hugh, she said, is suffering from serious mental health issues. As is well documented, he has been treated for severe depression in recent years. The events of the last few days have greatly worsened matters. He has suffered another serious episode and is now receiving inpatient hospital care where he'll stay for the foreseeable future. Once well enough to do so, he intends to respond to the stories that have been published. She said her husband had been first told of the allegations last Thursday. In the circumstances, and given Hugh's condition, I would like to ask that the privacy of my family and everyone else caught up in these upsetting events is respected. I know that Hugh is deeply sorry that so many colleagues have been impacted by the recent media speculation. We hope this statement will bring that to an end. Moments earlier, The Metropolitan Police had confirmed it was not investigating, that there was no evidence to suggest a criminal offence had been committed in the case. The BBC had responded, saying, having paused its investigation yesterday at the request of the police, it would now restart it with a thorough assessment while continuing to be mindful of its duty of care to all involved. For many, the processing of this news is just beginning.
He's the face of the BBC in many ways, particularly in terms of news. Absolutely. I don't think it's quite such a shock. I think the speculation has been so rampant for the last few days that it's more a relief in a sense than a shock.
The Sun broke the story in its Saturday paper, alleging that a high-profile, unnamed presenter at the BBC had paid £35,000 to a much younger person for sexually explicit images, beginning when that younger individual was 17. More allegations were front page every day since, although on Monday the lawyer for the young person said the story was rubbish and nothing criminal had taken place. Some will now be asking whether the Sun has questions to answer for its decisions. Tonight, the paper said it has no plans to publish further allegations. It added that it, at no point in our original story, alleged criminality, and also took the decision neither to name Mr. Edwards nor the young person involved in the allegations.
Scientists have collected fragments from the sea floor of Papua New Guinea, thought to belong to the first interstellar object that's believed to have entered the Earth's atmosphere. Some claim the fragments could be a sign of another civilization. However, concerns are being raised about how the fragments were collected and documented. The ABC's Marianne Farr reports.
In 2014, a giant interstellar fireball landed in the ocean about 80 kilometres north of Manus Island in Papua New Guinea. Scientists have wanted to analyse it for years, and late last month, Professor Avi Loeb from Harvard University set out to recover the remains.
We decided to go there on a ship that was fittingly called Silver Star.
Using a magnetic sled, his team excavated debris from the ocean floor.
Most of the material was volcanic ash, black powder.
They used a fine mesh sieve to filter the ash and made the discovery they hoped for.
That was a thrilling moment. I hugged the people around me when we found it.
In total, the team collected more than 50 tiny objects known as spherules.
The spherules are tiny spheres, metallic marbles, and they are a fraction of a millimeter in size.
If proven to be from outside our solar system, it will be the first time humans have studied interstellar material. Now back in the United States, Professor Loeb has 3 laboratories working on identifying the objects.
I realized that even though it took FedEx a few days to deliver them to my home, it probably took millions or billions of years for them to arrive to Earth.
At this stage, he's not ruling any possibilities out.
This meteor was moving at a speed of 60 kilometers per second outside the solar system, faster than 95% of all stars. So that suggests potentially that it could be a spacecraft from another civilization.
Other scientists, including Australian National University Professor of Geochemistry Mark Norman, have cautioned against such claims.
It's an interesting idea that these may be extraterrestrial civilization in some way, but I don't think there's any compelling evidence that would point in that direction.
Understandably, though, the discovery has sparked excitement worldwide. While Professor Loeb's team gets underway with its study, back in Papua New Guinea, officials are raising paperwork concerns. Mr McCallum says complexities with the application process arose from the unique nature of the research.
This is the first time anybody has researched an object from interstellar space, so it hasn't fitted into any of the traditional research mechanisms that people typically follow for a biological or geological science program.
The Harvard research team collaborated with the PNG University of Technology on the project. A letter from the university's Vice-Chancellor pledges full support for the expedition, saying the outcomes are likely to provide the most significant astronomical discoveries ever made. Paperwork issues aside, Rob McCallum says the expedition should be seen as a success.
This project is of huge scientific value to the astrophysicists around the world. This is going to potentially change our understanding of the universe around us. And I'm just so delighted that Papua New Guinea got a front seat at the table.
We hear a lot about salaries in Australia being much higher than here, but the latest figures on CEO salaries across the ditch are jaw-dropping. CEO salaries at Australia's 100 largest companies averaged more than $5 million last financial year. Much of that payment comes from bonuses. So how can you judge just what a CEO is worth? The ABC's Angus Randall reports.
Australia's top CEOs are earning more in a year than most Australians are likely to earn in a lifetime. Between their base pay packet and millions of dollars in bonuses, Australia's top 100 CEOs are earning 55 times more than a typical worker, around $5.2 million. Sally McManus is the Secretary of the Australian Council of Trade Unions.
This just sort of shows the big problem we've got in the world, actually, and in Australia in terms of inequality. I mean, no one has a job that is 55 times more complex or harder, or they work harder. That's simply not the case. What is actually happening is CEOs create their own market. They push their own wages up, and that benefits all of them. And in the end, that's the amount that ends up being paid simply because they say that, that's what the market is.
CEOs have practically taken a pay cut in the past year. The year before, they were earning 98 times more than the typical worker. Ed John from the Australian Council of Superannuation Investors has been looking into the figures. He says pay at the highest levels is still being affected by the pandemic.
In that year at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of boards zeroed out CEO pay, so they did exercise restraint. The year after, as things bounced back, we saw a catch-up in bonuses, and what we're seeing now is that's dropped back down, but you're only as good as your last game, and we're going to find out how boards navigate 2023, and I think there'll be very low investor appetite for big bonuses where performance hasn't been delivered.
So how does a company and its shareholders put a very large dollar figure on its CEO's performance? Professor Emeritus David Peets is from Griffith University's Business School.
They have to pass some hurdles which vary between companies. They might be profits or costs or something like that. But those hurdles are generally pretty easy to reach. If the firm starts to worry that its CEO's pay might be going down, then they'll fiddle around with a formula or bump up the base pay or something like that. So it's not a purely objective system by any means. There's a lot of subjectivity built into it.
What about actual value, what this person who's getting paid an enormous amount of money is bringing to that company?
Well, that's there in theory. That's there as part of the rationale. And when you ask a company rep, why is your CEO being paid this much? Oh, of course they bring so much value. But often it's these other criteria that I've mentioned. And, of course, some of the things that represent value aren't necessarily making people better off. If you've been sitting on the phone for 3/4 of an hour waiting to get through to some big company and you're told your call is important to us, that might be reducing your productivity, but it is increasing the value of the CEO because it's reducing the costs by not having enough staff on the call centres.
The highest earning CEO was Macquarie Group's Shamara Wickramanayake, who took home $23.7 million last year.
Playing certain types of music to plants has been found to boost their growth, but plants can make a kind of music of their own. The composer Jason Singh has been creating soundscapes by harnessing the electrical pulses given off by the plants. The BBC's Nicola Stanbridge visited his latest installation in southern England to find out how he does it.
Amid a maze of hanging flowers is a secret plant disco. Jason Singh has been wiring up local plants to listen in on their electrical signals and converting them into music.
This project is called The Place Between. Different members of communities have come together, wrapping this copper wire around the flowers, so they then produce these incredibly long strands hanging. I've created these immersive soundscapes.
You've recorded some of these flowers though, haven't you?
I've recorded the data from plants, the electrical signals that are running through them when they were alive, through different processes have converted those things into music. There's actually a cabbage plant here that was recorded that's actually gone into one of the hangings. It's also got the music that came from it at the very beginning.
So how do you record plants?
I use a tiny computer that picks up biofeedback from any living thing, and then in real time it converts that signal of voltage that has been picked up into notes.
Botanist at the Natural History Museum, Dr. Sandra Knapp, explains what these pulses are.
All of nature is charged, and that's due to the way electrons and protons and neutrons are organized around atoms. And they come together in molecules, and so a lot of the responses that we have to do with the coming together and falling apart of these charged molecules and atoms. The electricity of nature, as it were. We're all closely related. I mean, we are related to bananas, let's face it. And there are things that are in common to all of us, and these things are at that very basic level of chemistry and electricity.
Is the sound coming out of your computer?
It is, yeah. If I wanted to, I'm able to manipulate that data and sort of change the mood of the piece. I have to say, a lot of the time when I'm working with plants, I try to keep things as much as possible from the compositions that have been created by the plants. Almost kind of like, it's like gardening, really. There's photosynthesis happening, that also affects the plant. If it's being watered, that also affects the plant. Insects and things, or if the plant's being touched. Nature doesn't always perform for me when I want it to. I'm at the mercy of the wildlife or the life forms that I'm recording.
Wow, wonder what a carrot sounds like. Some of your final feedback before we head off. A lot of you getting in touch about the Gloriavale decision that found 6 women were workers rather than volunteers, employees. This person says, I'm an immigrant. You can't work in return for food and shelter without a visa, even if no money is involved. The government classes it as employment. No difference for Gloriavale. Another says, let's not forget it's not just 6 women who are actually employees. It will apply to many, many more people working under duress at the risk of being kicked out. And this one, very short and sweet. Excellent judgment, they say. That's us for this evening. The late news team's going to keep you updated throughout the night. Now, join Julian Wilcox and Justine Murray from 6 a.m. tomorrow. That's for live coverage of the official Matariki ceremony in Rotorua. And then Susanna Leatawa for Matariki morning from 10 a.m. until midday. Don't forget, tune in then, and we will see you back on Monday. Have a great long weekend if you're getting one.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. I'm Todd Zahner. The barrister who led the legal team for 6 women against the Gloriavale Christian community says they can legally pursue unpaid wages now that the Employment Court has ruled they were employees and not volunteers. Brian Henry says the women who were born into the West Coast commune were groomed to do unrelenting, grinding work. Meanwhile, the government's charity regulator says Gloriavale could be stripped of its charity status. Gloriavale's leaders say they